I'm Ryan, and today we are going to work on an acrylic landscape lesson. All of the tools and materials will be listed in the video description, and if you'd like help with the drawing process, I'll have the traceable up over on Patreon, along with the reference photo for color matching. With that said, let's jump into it. So, as per usual, we are going to start in the background here in the sky, work our way to the foreground. But before we do that, I would like to note, for those of you wondering, asking, Ryan, didn't you just paint a beach scene? The answer is yes, but I had a really good time. It was such a cathartic process, and it is midsummer, so I thought, you know what, let's do another one. With that said, I am changing the setup a little bit here today. As you can see, I have the reference photo taped to my canvas, and that's just because this painting that we're going to do, it has a lot of different colors, a lot of mixes. If you look at the palette, there really isn't a lot of similarity between the colors that we have here and what we have there. So again, a lot of mixing will be required, and when we do have such diverse palettes like this, I do like to kind of mix my pigments on the palette, test them on a reference photo, make sure they're correct, then go and apply them to the canvas. That way I don't make things messy quickly or anything like that. So that's what we're going to be doing. Let's jump into it. Let's hop into the background and paint some light. So as noted, I'm going to be using a smaller round-headed brush for this first application. It is about 1/8 of an inch, and I'm going to use it because it has very soft round edges, which is great for things like clouds. So I'm going to start by making sure that that brush is a little bit damp. Then I'm going to work on the light area of the photo. So I'm starting with some titanium white, which I'll just move right down here. I'll grab the smallest hint of cadmium yellow deep hue, take off the excess, move that little bit in here, and then I'll start applying that to the center of the light up here on my canvas. And I'll also test it here. Generally I test it first, but it looked correct. It is correct. That's fantastic. Love it when that happens. And I'm just going to work this all the way to the edges of where that light is going to span, and maybe even a little bit overlapping the areas that are a bit orange and pink in the reference photo. That way I have just a little bit to blend with. This is our first layer of pigment, so it's a little bit thin. I can still see the drawing through it, which is useful at this point, though we might want to go back and use a bit more of a thicker layer in just a little bit. Now I'm going to look at the color that surrounds it, and it's kind of a pinkish red. So I'll take a little bit of our cadmium red light hue. I'll move that down here. I'll take a little bit of yellow to turn it into an orange. Quite a lot of titanium white to brighten it up. And as you can see, the white desaturated it, but it also brightened it. Give this a test. Oh, that's wonderful. We are getting exceedingly lucky here today. So now, I'll start applying this along those edges, not applying much pressure, and I'm looking for a soft blend into all of the light we just applied. So I'm using very soft applications because the more pressure you add, the more you move around that paint, the more you create strokes by accident. So I'm just working my way along that edge. And as you can tell in the reference photo, the left-hand side is a bit sharper and the right-hand side is a bit softer. So there's more of a blend over here and there's less of one over here. Go back, grab a little bit more, start extending it out, because we're soon going to switch to more of a purpley red, but I want a bit of this to blend into that. So I'm just working this along my drawing. There we go. It's also worth noting that while we're working with a reference photo, we don't have to follow it exactly. It's there to help us figure out where everything's going to go and make sure things are constantly diverse and interesting, but If we have other ideas or we want to take artistic liberties, we are more than welcome to do that. Don't feel like you have to follow the reference photo to a T. It's just there to help. Let's get a little bit closer though. Now we're going to continue moving outwards, and as we move farther out, the pigments, they get a little bit darker. So I'll take what I have here, I'll mix right beside it, that way I can use this as a reference. I'll create a bit more of that orangey pink. This time I'm going to use a little bit less titanium white though. So you can see the contrast on the palette right there. You can see that this actually has a bit more yellow in it. I don't know that we want it to be more orange, I think we just want it to be a little bit darker. So I'll work a bit more red, a bit more white, and I think this might be it. So we'll give this a try. It's a little bit saturated and it's a little bit dark. So I'll add a hint more titanium white. And then I'll start applying this right along those edges, and I can blend this back into the previous orangish red that we applied. Just like that. And then this is going to kind of work its way out around this cloud, because the light that's being emitted here is going to work its way up. Like that. Now we're going to continue playing, and I think we'll start on a cloud, which is a bit more of a purple. So we'll start here with blue, because blue and red do mix to make a nice purple. We're using Cerulean blue right here. So that's what the purple looks like, void of titanium white and Mars black. So this is a very saturated, very thin pigment. When you add titanium white, you thicken it, you desaturate it a little bit, and you brighten it. When you add Mars black, you take down that brightness that you achieved with the titanium white, you make it a bit more gray because the white and the black mix to a gray, so you take down the saturation a little bit. And that's good because generally the pigments, the colors mixed out of just natural colors void of these two, can be a little bit too stark. So I'll give this a try. I like the color, but I can tell that it's too dark. So more titanium white. And when we're adding more titanium white, what should really be going through our heads, oh that's perfect, is the fact that we're taking down the saturation even further. So if you find that it's getting quite dull, interject more of that red and blue into it. With that said, I am now, as you can see, working this cloud around all of that really nice orange and peach that we applied. The smaller round-headed brush is giving me a softer application for all of this. Just like that. And then I'm going to come back down as I start to run out of pigment, and I'll subtly blend this into that peachish orange that we have. So I'm just going over the edges. I'm using a very soft stroke. And this is going to give it a slight blend. There we go. You can see a little protruding piece down in the reference photo that I'm going to interject now. Just a nice little detail I wouldn't have thought to work in otherwise. And then a little bit of a pitter-patter cloud down here. Make that interesting. This, of course, also occurs at the bottom. So we'll start doing that as well. And I think I'm going to move you even closer for this next part. And then we'll mix on the reference photo by ourselves. Again, just for the next part. So as you can see, at this point, it's really just looking a little bit abstract, which is quite interesting because when you don't see shape or form, what you really pay attention to is color and value. And that means we really have an opportunity here to make sure that our pigments are correct, that we do like them, that they're meshing in the way that we want. And that's really just what I'm taking this opportunity to do here. There we go. If you find that your pigments aren't blending well, just make your brush a little bit more damp and you should find more success. There we go. Now again, we started moving this peachish red up here, and now it's time to work on the cloud for it. So I'm just about out of that pigment. When we need to mix more of a pigment, I like to mix on top of / beside the initial mixture. That way I have a good reference point. Kind of bouncing back and forth here between the blue and the red until I get a consistent purple. Titanium white, Mars black. We made it significantly more dark and gray, so we'll bring it back to life by giving it some extra light, and then also color. You can see that I have the original mixture still at the top, and you can see that this purple is a bit darker and a bit more blue centric. So more red, more white. And that is what we wanted. Great. We found it. So now I can start applying this, but as you can see, I applied a massive amount of paint very quickly there. If you look at the brush, we did a lot of mixing with it. There's paint almost on the entirety of it. So we have a couple of options. One, we can just find areas to work off this massive amount of paint, or we can take it off with a paper towel or something of that nature. But what we don't want to do is start any specific edge work right now, because we're just not going to have a detailed brush to do that with. All of that paint is going to make it a lot harder to work with. So right now I'm just filling in past areas and applications. We are working with acrylics, so they are innately transparent. A lot of this will require multiple layers, so that's kind of just what I'm taking this opportunity to do, more layers. And as you can see, I'm kind of avoiding the edges currently because the brush is still difficult to work with. There we go. Looking at the reference photo, I'm saying, okay, you know what, we have more right here. Kind of connects over here. Might take a little bit of a liberty. Brush is almost out of paint. Okay, so now I'm going to take this brush. You can see that while it's almost out of paint at the tip, it still has quite a bit at the bottom. We don't want that. That could dry, that could harden the bristles. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this, I'm going to clean it in some water, just a little dish that I have over here. Take all of that off. It's now nice and damp. It's now nice and clean. I can now take that mixture we worked so hard to make, and I can start working delicately around my edges again. See that? Very nice. Again, I'm playing with the center area, tapping in extra little clouds here and there, just making it as interesting as I can. And then I think I want a little bit of this pinkish red light working its way on the bottom here, just on that lip. See it in the reference photo? It makes sense. The light is going to wrap its way around the subjects it touches. So I'm just taking a little bit of yellow here, quite a bit of red, quite a bit of titanium white, going for that mixture that I have right there, still very notable. That looks about right. Give that a try. So I'm coming down. Oh, and that is it. Perfect. There we go. I find once I use the reference photo for a couple of applications, I kind of learn how to make that mixture, and then I don't have to go back and check every single time, which is really nice. But if you struggle a little bit with that, then it's something you can do. And remember that reference photo is available up over on Patreon. With that said, here you can see I'm just working a little bit of that light down into the cloud, having it dissipate as it works that way. And I'll also incorporate a bit more of it over here. So far, so good. Also, make it a bit brighter. Maybe a hint more peachy. And then I'll come up to the top of this cloud and give it some light wrapping around it. So it's wrapping around both the top and the bottom because the cloud is in front of the light source. And so it's going to wrap around both sides, leaving this area, the darkest area, that which we are actually looking directly at. So we're looking at the back of the cloud, essentially. Here you can see I'm doing a little bit of blending. That purple, for the most part, has dried, but my brush is damp, so I'm able to do a bit of a wet into dry technique here, which is fairly common with acrylics, just because they do dry so quickly. And you know what, I'll take more of that, work it up here. So far, so good. Again, we're still kind of void of form. It does look a bit abstract at this point, but it's kind of meant to. It'll make sense when we pull the camera back and we do a bit of the actual background in a little bit. Again, that light is wrapping around this as well. There we go. Cleaning my brush just because it had quite a bit of paint on it. Grab more. And I know that might sound a little counterintuitive. The brush had too much paint, so I wiped it off, and then I went and I grabbed more paint. The whole idea there is that I had more paint where I didn't want it on the brush, to the point where it wasn't easily controllable. When I go back and I grab more pigment, it's simply on the tip of the brush where I do have a lot of control over it. Here I'm just mixing in a little bit of that nice pinkish peach, making the entirety of the cloud a little bit more cohesive. I think we need to mix a bit more. There we go. Come back in to that bottom. I think I'll work it over this slightly darker orange. Have it wrap its way around the top of this cloud, and then, you know what, we'll put it on this cloud as well. And with this cloud, we're essentially putting it on the top / left-hand side, and we'll have it dissipate as it moves to the right, because the light is shining this way, so it's not really going to touch much of the top here. There we go. We always need to think about where subjects are in relation to that light. Now, I really want to show you that when we take a step back, you notice that this doesn't really look like this yet. It's still not supposed to. We're still kind of just getting those bare bones in there. But what I'd really like to note is that if you look at this in contrast with this right here looks significantly more blue. And I would say that this is actually blue at its core, where this is still a purple and it is still a red dominant purple. So why, when we have access to this, why are we not testing on this? Why are we not making that blue and applying it there right now? Why not? We have the resources. The answer is that we still have a lot of yellow happening in here. When yellow and blue touch, they equal green. This sky is void of green, and it would be very easy to accidentally be a little bit messy and work that blue in there right now while we still have the yellow, and then end up with greens. I don't want that. So what I'm doing is I'm working with my yellows, my peaches, my pinks, my oranges, my reds, my purples, all of the colors that fit together really well, don't dilute each other, don't make major differences. And then once all of those are applied and applied correctly, then I'll come back in and I'll make all of this the blue that it should be. That way I'm not jumping back and forth between yellowish pigments and bluish pigments and just kind of diluting everything and making it muddy. So it's one of those things where, again, it's not meant to look the right way just yet. We're building up to it. We will get there, and there is a very good reason for it. So with that said though, we have a lot yet to do. Let's jump back into it and continue having some fun. Now I still have quite a bit of this really nice dark base purple left on my palette, so I think the next step here is just going to be going in and mapping the more dominant, darker areas of these clouds and really starting to put some form into them, because we've been working in this small area, we've been working out with all of these different colors, and while that can be a nice way to work, while we have this pigment, we might as well start building these bases and then working off of them. So what I'm going to do in this next step is just fill in this larger area of cloud here, this larger area of cloud here, paint in this dark pigment, which will eventually turn a little bit more blue. And then from there we can come back together and start applying those highlights. And talking yet again about how light wraps around them, how to make it look three-dimensional, and how to make it all nice and cohesive. Also, here's a little note. I feel like when a lot of people paint clouds initially, they're kind of round, they work like this, they're all very consistent. Look at the odd shapes that these clouds consist of. That's so important. That's what's going to make it interesting, that's what's going to make it diverse, that's what's going to retain interest of a viewer over a longer period of time. If the eye looks at it and it doesn't initially kind of read, scan, understand everything, then the viewer is going to spend significantly longer looking at that piece, analyzing it, trying to figure out how every part of it works. And that is really what you want to do as an artist if you want to create a truly captivating piece that can, hold attention. So what I'm doing here is following the reference photo, but it is a photo. It is of real life. And clouds, more often than not, are a bit more complex than we initially innately think of them as. So that's what we're doing here. You can even see that I have little pieces breaking off. We have little openings of different shapes and sizes, and that's something I'd highly implore you to consider and work on in your paintings, because it can make such a difference. So now that I have all of the larger areas of my clouds mapped out, I'm going to take that red, a lot of titanium white, a bit more, hint of our yellow, mix more of this nice pink pigment that we've been using, maybe a little bit more yellow. There we go. That looks like the pigment we had before. So from there, I'll say, okay, you know what, the light, it's right here. It's shining this way, which means it hits the right-hand side of all of these clouds, right? So I'm just going over that again on ones you've already done to show you initially. But it also moves this way. So now it's going to hit the left-hand side of these ones. And what we want to do here is create a nice, warm, pinkish edge, as you can see. And then do a slight little blend inwards. Now, most of my purple here is dry, so I am yet again blending wet onto dry, which, of course, isn't actually a blend. It's applying one pigment on top of another pigment, but because our brush is damp, our pigment is even more transparent than it normally is. So you can see that purple through the pink right here, and as a result, it looks like they're blending. You're getting that combined color and hue from them. So that's what we're doing right now. We're just working our way along the tops. As I get farther and farther away from this light, I'm letting it dissipate. I'm using less and less. So over here, it's just a hint. I'm not using much at all. But back again over here, when we are very close to that light, we might want to use significantly more. There we go. Just finding other little openings I can do in the clouds, make them a bit more interesting. The bottom of these will also have quite a bit of that effect. And actually the majority of the bottom here will be clouds. So it can be a lighter pink cloud. What we're looking at right here, for the most part, is the back of this cloud, right? The back of this cloud. But there are going to be clouds that are a bit farther away that might have that light working all the way through them if they are more thin. So we can make this back area a bit lighter. Again, not something I would think to do, but I see it in the reference photo and I say, you know what, that looks great. It diversifies it more than I personally would have, and that's a good thing. And you also don't always have to work from reference photos. I think you can work from your imagination and create really, really interesting things. Sometimes I like to kind of come up with compositions first in my head, and then go and find reference photos for textures and details and that sort of thing. That way I don't just rely upon kind of what I already know, and that way I can further diversify. Sometimes I like to work directly from reference photos. This is going to be very reference photo heavy, but I'm also going to take some larger artistic liberties later on and make some changes to it. So it's all about working the way you want to and balancing that. I feel like I've been talking a lot about the reference photo in this lesson, and that's because I feel like it's very useful in this scenario, but it's not how everybody likes to work, and you don't have to work that way. You can work much more intuitively. Give things a try, fix them, you know. And you do learn a lot through that process. With that said, I actually have quite a large pink cloud kind of coming off this area right here. This actually could be a bright pink. So I think I'm just going to take this and I'll convert it. There we go. This one's much more thin of a cloud. It's important to think about the density of your clouds when you're painting them, because if it's a very dense cloud, it's not going to have a lot of light working through it. The back of it is going to be much darker, but if your cloud is significantly more thin, more transparent, it'll have that light work through it. It'll have probably the color that the edges of the other clouds do. So that's a good general rule to work from. Here I'm going back and I'm doing many layers because we are working over a darker purple pigment. And again, acrylics are semi-transparent. So if you want to apply a light color over a dark layer, you generally have to do a couple of layers. There we are. It's coming along swimmingly. We're almost done with our highlights, and so soon we'll be able to move onto the background color of the sky. But before we do that, I actually have a bit of light coming up from over here. So yet again, I noted that we weren't going to use a lot of blue in this because I wanted to make sure our yellow was safe, because we still were going to use yellow, and we still are. So I'm taking that cadmium yellow deep hue, some titanium white, looking for where it is in the reference, saying, okay, you know what, it's right here. So we'll get a bit more of a golden highlight right there. And whatever's right next to the light will have more of a golden highlight than a peach highlight initially. So you know what, I can actually work that back here a little bit. And then on this side, it's kind of working its way around these. And then a little bit back in here as well. And it's a very subtle change in color, but it does make it significantly more interesting. Then we need a lighter mixture. So I'll take quite a bit of titanium white, and you'll notice I'm grabbing it from this side now rather than this, because look, you have all of these different colors to dilute it. We don't want that. We want something significantly more clean. So try to avoid that when you want a bright color that can't be diluted. And I'll add a bit more of this really nice golden pigment right there. Of course, it's semi-transparent. You can see the pink through it a little bit. It's a nice look. A little bit more of that light wrapping its way up around here. And then I'll move some extra pink up into that area. So I'll actually take the yellow off my brush so it doesn't dilute it. Grab quite a bit of our white, a little bit of our red, a little bit of our yellow. And we'll just work this up. And eventually this will blend with the colors of our sky. But this is essentially a very transparent, very soft cloud that's behind this other cloud. And so the golden light can kind of work its way into it because it isn't dark and it won't have any blues. There we go, and it can be just a little messy at the top for now. With that said, we're going to save the bottom area for later. Right now we're going to mix the color for the top of the sky and start bringing this area together. Now I've taken a step back so that I can see the top of the reference photo here. I've switched to a medium-sized flat-headed brush. This one is about 1/2 inch wide. And I'm going to start with some Cerulean blue. We want to take a little bit of our red, maybe about half the amount of blue that we mixed. That way it has a hint of purple, but is blue dominant. Then I will take quite a bit of titanium white, about half that of Mars Black, because Mars Black is a very strong pigment and this pigment is already quite dark. This is going to desaturate it because our initial pigment was certainly far too saturated. And I'll give this a test. And what do we see? It is significantly darker than what I actually need. So we'll take quite a bit of titanium white. And there you can see I did take from the more diluted area of titanium white because we are mixing a lot of paint and this really does have a combination of just about everything. So I'm not as concerned about it as I was previously. We'll give this a try. And as you can see, it's a bit too gray. It's a bit too blue. So we'll add some extra red into it, which will also give it some extra saturation. Give that a try. Oh, it's so close. Look at that. I think we just need a hint more saturation, so we'll add a hint more blue, we'll add a hint more red. We'll mix these together. Again, a hint more blue. I'm just adding very small amounts at this point because it's so close to what I want, and I don't want to skew it far in one direction or another. You can see that I'm not going with the first pigment I mixed though. I am waiting until I get what I actually want, which is this. So I'm now going to take it and I'll start covering this top area. The sky will change its color, its value as it progresses, but I'm just going to use this as a very basic starting point and base layer. As you get towards the edges, you see that it gets a bit darker. So we intermix a little bit of extra Mars Black in there. Throw that up into the corners. When I work on large areas with flat-headed brushes, I like to work in X-shaped patterns initially because it helps me move the paint around much more effectively than if I was just working horizontally or vertically. And then in the end, I go back over it with a very soft stroke to even out any areas that might still have that very strange pattern. So from there, as I get closer in, you'll notice that it's far too dark. So I add a lot of titanium white. I'll probably add a bit more red because we're getting closer to that pink. There we go. It's really nice. So I'll throw that along the edge here. Make it a little bit brighter, a little bit more pink again. Build that up. Again, brighter. Oh, that's really nice. It's a little bit less saturated than the reference photo, but I actually like that a lot because it makes all of the saturated pigments pop so much more. So now, while everything's still wet, I'm trying to work fairly sharply around my clouds, but I'm doing it quickly so that I can move back up into the sky and just get that nice soft blending gradient. If you do miss that opportunity, you can go back up over into this by just using a bit more water on your brush, make it a bit more damp. And what you're probably noticing right now, an issue, is that look at this with that in comparison to that. This is smooth, this is soft, this is not. So what we need to do is create a gradient, take some red, take a lot of titanium white. Might be too dark. Yeah, it's too dark. Take a lot more titanium white, make something nice and bright here. You can see I'm still working quickly. Oh, you know what, that's perfect. That's even better than what we had before. So I'm applying this there, and then blending. Blending up, giving it a bit of an arc. And actually you can see that the light moves with a little bit of a direction, so we'll switch to that. But I want it to be nice and soft in the end. So you tell you what, we'll just do our little blend over here. This is actually meant to be a bit more blue on this side, so I'm not doing much. And you can see there's a little bit of a line there because there's a little bit of a line here. And now I'm going to take all of that pigment off my brush and start making those applications that we just applied quite smooth. Now this area is admittedly a bit tricky, might take a couple of tries. And it's acrylics, which is great because it's very forgiving. If you want to take a couple of tries, you just let it dry over 5-10 minutes, and you come back and you give that sky another go. Don't get discouraged if it isn't perfect the first time. I'm not sure that mine will be here. As you can see, it's getting a little out of hand with the highlights. I might go back, grab a little bit of that darker pigment, which I no longer have, so I'll quickly, very quickly, mix up a bit more. There we go. Looks quite similar. It's good. Make it a bit more blue, make it a bit more black. Head that back up. We've mixed it once, it's easier to mix the next couple of times. You can see that I'm blending it down horizontally, but very softly with my brush. So you can still kind of see there's nice strokes from before. Normally we don't have such intense sessions. This is kind of fun, exciting. So, what I'm noticing between the two photos is that my sky is a hint darker and it's a hint more desaturated. But I'm actually very happy with both of those things. Again, I noted earlier you can take artistic liberties. That is what I am choosing to do here. Because by having this part of the sky a little bit darker, it makes that pop more. The same goes for the saturation levels. Generally, you don't want to make everything in a painting hyper-saturated. Otherwise, the eye doesn't really know where to go. Here I'm just softening things a little bit. We still, of course, have to do this area of the sky. Wasn't able to get to it before this started to dry. That's okay. I'm not concerned. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch to the smaller round-headed brush. Going to find that pink that we were using for right here. I'll start right down here at the bottom. You know what, I might make it a little bit darker. Grab a mix of those two. And then I'll start working my way up, just because when we were making those brush strokes, we made some darker impressions down here that I didn't really want. So a lot of my stroke here is going to be done with a mix of a rounded motion, so that it doesn't necessarily show a streak in one direction or another, but where there is supposed to be a notable streak, and there are a couple down here in the reference photo, then I will start moving in that direction. So I'm doing that right here. Just making a very, very soft impression. Just like that. Incredibly subtle. That's what we're looking for. You know, I can work this back down into here. We also didn't get to this area, so you know, we'll have to go back in there, but that's okay. I am very, very pleased with what we were able to cover in that dry time. And this is good because it'll let me show you what we do when we don't cover everything in dry time, because it rarely happens. And that's okay. Still plenty of little workarounds. With that said, I do feel like I see a little bit of brush stroke up here, so what I'm going to do with my brush that doesn't have any paint on it right now, I'm just going to move up with very minute brush strokes that are kind of moving in the direction of the light. Up into here, I might start working with a little bit of a rounded stroke. You see that? And this is going to make a very, very minute change in the painting, but it'll make the overall flow of it feel a little bit better. Right now, it looks a bit messy. I am cognizant of that. It's okay. We'll just continue going over it. Till it softens. And if you get any of the small markings of pink and a pattern in this direction, it'll just look like clouds, which is really nice. Very subtle, distant clouds that it's adopting all of the beautiful, really beautiful colors of light. You can also move this down a little bit. So as you can see, I've cleaned up the sky a little bit, and now I'm going to go in and fill all of these little areas that we weren't able to get when we were doing the top, because it dried and it required more time, it required more blending, and in that time, this just didn't get done. So I'm going to take the smaller round-headed brush, yet again, make sure that it is nice and damp. Here I have the wide selection of purples that I mixed for that sky, and I'm going to mix more of them, mixing something like that, bringing it right down. So I'll start with some blue, I'll grab a little bit of red, probably about an equal mixture at this point, see which way it leans, what we need to do to it. Grab a little bit of Mars black, good amount of titanium white. It's also worth noting that I had lunch in between the last clip and this clip, so all of these colors and mixes aren't necessarily that fresh in my head, and I need to kind of refigure things out. which is something to consider when you're painting. I used to be someone who, that needs to be a little bit darker and a little bit more blue and a little bit more desaturated. I used to be someone who said, oh, you know what, I can't paint, I need like a 6-hour block. That way I don't take any breaks and it's all fresh the whole time. But that's just, it's not realistic for a lot of us. And it isn't realistic for me anymore. So now I say, okay, you know what, if I can put 2 hours into it here, I'll do that, get a little bit farther, a little bit better, and over time, it actually does quickly add up. And I think it's actually beneficial in the long run, because you do have to continuously go back, remix colors, figure things out again. And it's a lot easier to do that, you know, in half an hour, in an hour, in even a day, than it is, you know, 2-3 weeks. So rather than waiting for that perfect opportunity, just getting to it, doing a little bit here and there, I think it'll really improve your work, as I feel it has mine. So anyways, I'm working my way into these clouds, as you can see. I'm trying to give little pitter-patters along the edges of a lot of these, make them relatively soft. You can tell that this as a whole is a bit darker than what we have over here. I am okay with that. I'm just moving this down first, and then I'm going to go up and change it. I said I was okay with it. I'm okay with it because I intend to change it, not because I actually think, oh, you know what, that dramatic change is entirely fine. So we'll grab some titanium white. We'll move that into our previous mixture. Go up, try that here. You know what, now it's a little bit brighter, it's a little bit blue. We'll add some red, which will make it less blue, but it'll also make it darker because this red pigment is a darker value than the value that we already had. So now I look at this and I say, you know what that is? That's a little bit too red. So we take some more blue. We just work back and forth until we get what we actually want. Remember, don't go with your first mixture. Make sure you're going with the right mixture. It's definitely better. Let's see. Do a little bit more of it. Give it a fair chance. Maybe a hint more titanium white. I find when going into, there we go, that's perfect. Significantly more complicated pieces and color palettes like this, a lot of people, myself included, initially just kind of start throwing color at the canvas and saying, oh, you know what, that's close, and oh, you know what, that's okay. It very quickly turns into a completely different painting, and maybe one that you don't necessarily want to make. It's better to take your time and figure things out. There we go. And again, that took me a long time to learn. But it's something that I am always cognizant of now when I'm painting, and I still do make changes. I edit the painting, I do a lot with it. But that thought process keeps the majority of it what I want it to be. So I can take artistic liberties and still have what I want in the end. But if I'm just taking artistic liberties through the entirety of it, then generally I don't end up with that which I really desire. So just something to keep in mind. But here, as you can see, I'm just working my way in and around all of these different clouds. My brush is semi-damp. I'm doing a couple of different layers to make sure that it's nice and thick. I'm doing slight blends over our clouds, and we'll go back and we'll do highlights along the edges again later to clean it up. And then as I get closer to this area, probably make it a little bit brighter and a little bit more pink. Yeah, just like that. It's great. Gets more blue as you move out to the edges. And remember, this is a cloud, so we can work a little bit of this over the edge, make it soft, but not too much. Now, if you look at how rough and toothy the edges of these clouds are, you probably look at it and you say it looks a little bit too disheveled. We want it to be slightly more clean. So what we're going to do, we're going to take that red, that titanium white, mix up a nice, really bright pink, probably add just the smallest hint of yellow because we've been doing that to add a little bit of warmth. Diversify our color, make it a bit more interesting. I'll test it. Looks like quite a good match. Now I'll go over those edges again. This time though, the pinkish orange, this almost peachish color is overlapping bluish purple in the darker values. So it's going to look like it's in front now, where before it looked like the background was in front of the cloud and it didn't make much visual sense. So this is great. This is an opportunity to kind of go back and refine things. My brush is quite damp, which is allowing me to get this semi-transparent look. And that's how we're making it look like a soft blend, despite the fact that now the darker area is yet again dry. So I'm just going to go back, do this a couple of times, build it up, because again, it's not going to look all that bright in your first application, because of course, we're applying a lighter pigment on top of a darker pigment. Those lighter pigments are semi-transparent, and so we need multiple layers. Really love the hint of yellow. It might not be all that noticeable on camera, but it's one of those subtleties that just adds so much to it. There we go. Tapping on a couple of extra little clouds here and there, making sure they're consistently interesting. They are breaking apart. The reference photo has couple of them winding around like that. Making the right hand side a bit more transparent, doing a slight blend that way, so that the more opaque side is on the left hand side, which makes sense because the light's hitting the left hand side, it'll make it brighter, it'll make it pop more, and that's what we want. Here I'm going back over these areas until I feel they are nicely filled out. This is also another cloud that could use a hint more highlight. Might throw a little bit of this at the bottom just in case it's different than the other pink. I want it to still feel cohesive. There we go. From there, I think what we should do is start adding a little bit more of that nice yellowish gold back into the painting. So I'll head over here, I'll move the camera, and then we'll get right on that. So before we begin, I think it's worth noting that this side of the painting we've been giving significantly less attention to. It looks a lot more rough, it looks a lot more simple. At this point, it's meant to. It's one of those things where, again, we just need to build up. And this side is something it'll get much more interesting when we start working the blue into this once we're done with all of the yellows and the golds. And on the note of the yellows and the golds, I do highly encourage you to make sure that there isn't any blue in your water on your brush, because if there is, this next yellow is going to look a little bit more green. So if anything's diluted, dirty, muddy, go give it a good clean, and then we'll start this next step. But for this step, we're going to start yet again with that same smaller round-headed brush. We're going to make sure that it's nice and damp. I'm going to grab just a little bit of our yellow and a lot of titanium white. Mix those two together till we get something nice and warm. Test that in here. Make sure it looks cohesive. It does. I'm very happy with that. Now we can add those highlights to the edge of this cloud. We can have it work its way around this one, around the back and top of this one. Getting some really nice mixes of color in there. We can have another distant cloud right around here. So I'm making a harder line on the right, and then I'm blending it back with these rounded strokes and almost no pressure. You can also blend it back with your finger. I'll create another little cloud here, like that. And then I'll make my brush very nice and wet. Grab a bit more, and we'll just blend up very softly from here into our pink. We don't want to go too far though, because the edges do have a little bit of blue, and we don't want that mixing in. This is just a nice little addition. There we go. Now we'll take that same brush, make a bit of that darker purple that we used for the base of the cloud, and we'll create some smaller wispy ones up higher. I'm going to make them a little bit brighter, so I'll test this in here, see how it looks. It's not bad, it's a little bit blue. So I'll add a hint of red, I'll add a hint of white. Test that. Getting very close, a little bit brighter. And that looks really good. So I'm going to look at my photo, find some areas for some smaller, softer clouds. And I think there's one right about here. So I'm going to start with a harder edge on the left-hand side, and I'm actually going to let this one just kind of work its way back through a series of taps. Always trying to create different types of clouds. That way it's consistently diverse and interesting. Here you can see I'm creating much smaller ones, and as we move up in the painting you can see that it's getting entirely lost because this value is the same as the value up at the top. There we go. Can work this down behind some of these. Just adding a little bit of detail to this side. Keeping a lot of these soft, a lot of these semi-opaque. Going over my edges just to soften things. But I wanted to show you this from a bit of a distance, that way you could see how it fits in and how it kind of starts to balance both sides of the painting. And now you can see how that little pitter-patter effect that I used on the brush on the top of the sky earlier actually works really well directionally with our clouds. There. You can see how a lot of them are directional, they're kind of pointing out. That way we stick with the main movements of the painting. And I think this one might be one of our last. We'll do one over here just for the sake of keeping it cohesive. But I think that's what I want for that area. Now, let's head down into this bottom area because this is quite interesting. It is all of these colors, but then we also start to move into softer pigments and some blues. So I have my reference photo taped so that's essentially on the horizon line of the water, which is really great because it helps me kind of simplify the painting and where I'm working specifically. With that, I am going to mix more of that very bright yellow that we were just working with. And again, it is essentially significantly more titanium white than it is cadmium yellow deep hue. And by the way, I'm using cadmium yellow deep hue simply because it's a bit warmer than your regular primary yellow. It's a little bit darker. So when you saturate it with titanium white, you desaturate it, but it doesn't look too bright, too vibrant. It's a much more, I think, tasteful pigment in sunsets. So that's kind of why I chose that pigment. There we go. That looks good. That looks really good. I'm going to take that yellow off of my brush now. I'm going to mix more of our pink. Again, we're working with very, very bright pigments right now. I'll get a hint of yellow. Let it lean into orange a little bit. Maybe a little bit more. Then I'll come along my edges and you can see just how well that pink matched with the previously applied pink. All of this light is working its way through the bottom of these clouds, which is why they have this nice transition from the yellow to the pink, just like up here. So I'm just kind of filling that in. Work it out a bit farther. And we'll go back and we'll add extra yellow on top of portions of this, but I wanted to keep it a bit more simple initially. Give us a bit of room to play. Now we're working over a bit of my drawing here, so I do want to use fairly opaque applications and not blend my pigment out too far, otherwise we will see that line at the end of the painting. It's one of those things I used to think, oh, you know, it'll be fine, I'll take that out later, and then I didn't. So here we're just making sure that we do that nice and early. So I'll go over it another time. I'm going over it with a slightly lighter pigment this time, trying to create more of a transition between the yellow and the pink that we have. And I think I'm going to brighten that up just a hint. There we go. Now we'll switch back to our yellow. And you'll probably see a pattern here, and that is the light itself is yellow, and then from it you get this pinkish orange, and then along the edges of the clouds you get more of that pinkish orange. It's a little bit darker though. And then you move into the cloud and it's purplish and soon to be bluish. So while we're doing a lot of these different clouds, complex clouds, it all follows that same kind of rule set. And that's something to think about if you ever get stuck or you feel like a certain area is a little complicated in theory, and maybe even application. Get a little bit brighter, continuing to just bump this up slightly here and there. And up here you have a lot more orange, so I'm going to work that down a little bit just because I want it to be nice and cohesive. I also love the look of the orange. So try this, apply it up here, test it. It's pretty good. Say, okay, you know what? The light, it's starting to move out, so we'll get it right around here probably. There we go. The edges of these can also have a bit of orangish pink. Already looks a lot better. Much more cohesive. That said, I'll do a little bit more. We'll just build it up slowly, slightly. I do recognize that this will be a bit of a longer tutorial, but there is a lot happening with color, and I just want to make sure that you get as much information as I can give you. There we go. Going back, thickening some of those previous applications. Might touch this pigment up into the top just to make things a bit more cohesive. You know, I definitely want more orange right in here. Here too. Maybe a hint here. But remember, there needs to be less as we move farther away from that light. Now we move into more colors like what we had in the sky, but this is going to be a bit darker. Actually, no, it's going to be a bit lighter. It's going to be lighter as we move farther down. It's going to be a little bit less saturated. just because there's so many colors blending together. When they do that, they tend to make sure that one of them doesn't shine above all of the others. It's kind of interesting, but we're going to make that a bit softer. So start with blue, start with red, then we'll take quite a bit of titanium white, a little bit of Mars black. We don't want it to be too dark, but we do want it to be very gray. Okay, try that in my previous mixture. It's brighter, that's what I want. Start applying that down here. And you can see it's actually quite close to the cloud, and that's good. Though I do think after doing this, I will want it, again, a little bit brighter. Our cloud is also going to change colors in a minute. So that's also something we can keep in mind if they look quite similar. I think I'm just going to take some titanium white and throw that directly on here. Much better. It's really nice, actually. Apply some of it over here. Connect it back up to the light. Here you can see I'm continuously brightening it. It should be extra bright right around here because we are so close to that light. And of course, the more titanium white we add, the more we desaturate it, which means the more it looks soft compared to the orange and those other colors, which is a good thing because it makes them pop, makes them look good. There we go. I am going to make a little bit of a darker area here for a cloud, but I'll do that once I'm done with the rest of this pigment. And again, up close right now, this might look a little bit messy. It's important that we trust in the process because at the end, well, you've seen the image. You've seen it in the thumbnail. I haven't seen it yet, but I have a lot of faith that this is going to turn out quite well. Anyways, I'm just making a slightly darker version for a cloud, which is going to go right here. Blending it softly on the top and the bottom, but this bottom area is going to be a little bit darker because the light's coming down and the bottom of the cloud isn't receiving that light. We're also going to use this pigment over here as an extension of this cloud, but I'll let a little bit of this light move in, so the cloud, it moves this way and then it comes back around this way. There's a little bit of an opening where the sky and the light can show through, and the cloud will come almost to the bottom, and then just with a little bit of white, essentially just what you see, I'll make that pink that we had. So I'm just going to continue with that, and then we'll continue together. Here is a blurry shot of both the painting and the reference photo, and this is essentially just to show you shape and form, how that's all kind of going together, and how ours, again, is just significantly less blue than the reference photo. So we are almost at the point where we are going to correct that, but first we're going to add some very subtle light rays in the distance. This is also just a good test to kind of see, again, how your clouds, your shapes, all of that is going. If you take a camera, you focus on something else, you look at the reference photo, you look at the painting, you can generally get a much better perspective of what is working, what's a little bit bigger, what's a little bit smaller, and all of that. So just again, another quick little tip. So now I want some of this nice golden light working its way down right here. To do that, I'm going to first mix a little bit of our orange. So I'll take red, I'll take yellow, I'll take a lot of titanium white. Mix those together, give us a nice thick base. Then I'll kind of figure out where I want to make the lines, and I'll make them in the air before I actually make them on the canvas. This is something you do a lot in gesture drawing, but can help a lot with painting too. And it's just to give you a little bit of practice before you really do anything. So I'm making some soft impressions here. They are semi-transparent right now, so you can still see that purple showing through them. They're also quite a bit saturated. That is okay, we're about to desaturate them. I'm now going to take significantly more titanium white, mix that in there. I'll also take a hint more red. So we are eliminating a lot of the yellow from that mix. And I'm applying this in the middle. So a little bit of that orange might show on the outskirts, just like this. And then I'm making it blend so it's cohesive. Now, cleaning my brush yet again, taking extra titanium white, we'll move that over here. We'll just grab a hint of what we were working with. Now it's a very bright mixture. I'll start blending that down. Blending it down from that light, so I'm actually starting in the light and I'm working my way. This is a little bit less yellow than what we had, that's okay. And as I get more comfortable with where they are, I start to move them out a bit farther. You notice that this one's more straight down, these are more on an angle, and the farther out we get, the more of an angle we're going to create. Right now it'll look chalky, you'll see all of these different colors through it. It's okay. Now we'll take a hint of yellow, a lot of white, more white, head up to that yellow base, and this is where we solidify things. If you find that it's still a little bit chalky, clean your brush, make sure it's just damp. Then you can go in with some pure water and just soften that bottom area. Keep things going. This will make it semi-transparent, which is nice for light generally. I like it here. And we'll just refine this over the next couple of minutes. So here we have a bit of a wide shot to show you what all of those light rays ended up looking like. In mine, they're definitely more stark than what we have in the reference photo, but I actually prefer them like that. I like that a lot. So now that we're actually officially done with our yellows, we're going to move up into here, make this look a little bit more like this. I am going to keep mine slightly more purple just because I like that. I think it's a good look, but we are definitely going to make it more blue, and I'm going to start doing so with the medium-sized flat-headed brush. Again, this one is about 1/2 inch wide, and I'm going to start by making sure that it is nice and damp. That way we can blend on top of our dry layers. I'm going to take quite a bit of our blue, about maybe half that red, and we're going to start with some trial and error. Grab some titanium white because we'll definitely need to gray it down. Some Mars black to make it a little bit darker. And you know what, we'll start by giving this one a try. I'll just tap that on here. It looks relatively close to the darker areas, but it definitely needs to be a little bit more blue, and it definitely needs to be brighter. So we'll add more blue, we will make it brighter. There we go. Give that a test. it's closer, it's not what we want. More blue. Hint of red. It's more saturated now. Give that a try. That looks pretty good along the edges here. I think it could use slightly more saturation. Again, a hint of red, about double that of blue. Trying again, and I think that's the mix I want. So now, I'll work my way in the middle of the body, this way a little bit, and you can tell just how stark of a difference that is from our purple. And you know what, I can already tell, while it's closer to that, I do want it to be more purple. Okay, so this is good. Glad we tried it. This is still too purple for me, so we'll continue with this mixture. I'll just add in a bit more red. I'll work my way up to the edges of these clouds. And you know what? If you try a color and you don't like it, that is okay. You can always just go over it. And it's not that I don't like this color, it's just that I really liked the purple. There we go. Moving this out, down. Oh, you know what? It's starting to grow on me. It's amazing. Sometimes you do a little bit of something in a painting and you say, I don't know. Then as soon as you start to elaborate with it, you fall in love with it. And that's something I'm normally very aware of. I like to give a pigment, a mix, the benefit of the doubt generally, especially if it's on the reference photo, but here I was hasty. And I said, you know what, I don't know that I like this, I like the purple, but I do like this a lot. It is a little bit more purple, but I'm a big fan. This I feel is a little bit too blue. Grab some red. A little bit more Mars Black. See, that's so easy to correct. So I'm just going over the middle, the body of our clouds, making them all cohesive, all fit together. Making sure my brush is consistently damp. Have this work its way back into this cloud. I'll skip the light rays because this does have quite a bit of blue in it, and if we went over that, it would turn to a green. I'm also letting the edges of all of these remain a little bit more purple. So I'm doing a slight blend, a little bit of a gradient towards all of them, and that's just happening because the brush is quite damp and the water is allowing the pigment to run out as I move up to there, as I release pressure, so that it's a contrast, a gradient from blue into the purple with all of those protruding pieces. There we go. This, of course, is a distant cloud covering up the light from the sun here. Wow. This is turning out really well. I'm excited. I will grab a little bit more titanium white, brighten it up, head over to my edges, make sure they're a little bit brighter. Again, not the true edges because those are a bit more purple, but the area that blends into that purple. This might be my favorite mix of colors yet. The subject itself, the clouds, it's quite loose, but when you put this much time and effort into color, like we did in the sky, it can really take some time. And in turn, it can really pay off. There we go, brightening this a little bit just because I did love that area in the middle, and I'd like it to work out in again, a bit of a gradient. I'd like to note that I am using the brush that I am right now because it has a nice sharp edge for working along any of the sharper clouds, but also it can carry a lot of paint, and this is a lot of surface area to cover. Make it a little bit brighter again. So I removed our reference photo, and this is what the sky turned into. I did end up going back and just reworking a little bit of that. I wanted to simplify it just ever so slightly, and I'm really happy with how this turned out. So from there, we are going to move down into the water, and we're going to use some pretty interesting mixes for it as well. Now, before we jump into the water, that was a phrase that it meant something. It didn't mean what I intended it to mean. We're not jumping into water. Before we start painting the water, we are going to start painting the sand right down here because we need to layer all of the water on top of it. We want some of the water to be fairly transparent, and that means we want some of the sand to show through. And it's a much easier process to paint the sand before the water. So with that said, I'm going to be using a different brush. This is yet again another flathead brush, but it is 1 inch wide. And I'm using this because we have a lot of space to cover, and this will help us do so consistently. Now I'm going to begin, as I always do, by making sure that it is nice and damp. Then I'll head to my palette, and as you'll see, I don't have any brown here. When you look at that, you probably say, oh, well, it's sand, it's probably brown. But in all actuality, we're getting a lot of reflective light down on the sand here. And its color is going to be very much actually determined by the light in the atmosphere. So what we're doing here is actually, we're going to mix our own brown, and we're going to do so with a lot of oranges. Because again, we do have those colors kind of up there. So I'm going to start by taking some of our red, moving that down here. Going to take about same amount of yellow, mix that up. We want a red dominant orange here, so I might grab a little bit more red. Then Mars black, then about an equal amount of titanium white, and this is just to get us started. And as you can see, we already have the start of a brown. Doing lots of mixing, going back and forth. It's very orange dominant, as I wanted. And let's give this a test. You apply that right there, it's far too orange. It's also too bright and saturated. So let's take some extra titanium white and Mars black to desaturate it, and I'm using more Mars black than I am titanium white because I want it to be darker. So now I have this. Let's give this a try. I think it's closer in color, but it's significantly too dark now. So I'll take more titanium white, mix that over here. We have a completely different brown than what we initially had. Give this a try. You know what? It's different, but I really like it. It's always interesting when that happens. Say, oh, do I go with that color that I do really like that I now have, or do I keep mixing? I'm going to keep mixing a little bit. I'm going to take this darker pigment that we have, work it over into this, give that a try. And I think that's the closest we've had so far, but it's not quite what I want. So, give it a good look. You know what, I think we'll do a little bit more Mars black. And I actually really like that. So, I think we'll take this pigment and we'll just start running it down here on the bottom. Lots of wide horizontal strokes. And I'm not using much pressure at all. because again, the more pressure you add, the more streaky it can get. Here you can see I pressed a lot of pressure into that brush. We achieved all of these additional colors. It's because they built up on the back end of the brush. Now, we could wipe it off, or we could just kind of mix it in. This is all of the same colors that we used before, so I'm not worried about it. Grab more of that paint. And I'm going to work this significantly far up into our water, because the farther up I make this, the more opportunity I have later on to have additional transparent water. If we just had the sand stop here, then that transparent water would have to go fully opaque to here, and then it could be transparent down here. But I want a lot more room to play. And as I apply this, I realize that this is actually quite yellow, maybe even a little bit green in comparison to what we have. So let's start playing with it. More Mars Black, more titanium white, grab some extra red this time. You can see it's much more purple dominant. Let's give this a try. Mix it into that first mixture. I like the two together. It's definitely getting better. And I'm also mixing, as you can see in these diagonal lines here, just so if there's any area that's a little bit brighter or darker, we're giving it a lot of movement. That way that area can become significantly more consistent. So I started with that, and again, I do like it a lot. I think it'll work really well with our water in a bit, but I'm just going to continue tweaking it. I think I am going to keep it a bit more yellow, and I might make the back here a little bit darker because it will have water over it. So extra Mars Black, extra titanium white, extra red. And you'll probably notice that we aren't grabbing blue, and that's just because we're going to have a lot of blue working over it, but also we have quite a bit of yellow in our mix, and if we were to start working in that blue, it would quickly turn to a real green. Getting a nice soft gradient here. It's not dramatic, but it does give us some depth. You can see that I'm continuously able to work back on top of all of this as well, just because my pigments are a little bit damp. I still have some water on my brush, and it's keeping it wet for a significantly longer period of time. So here we have a wide shot of the piece so far, and it kind of looks like it's broken up into 3 different sections, which is kind of fun. But with that, I'm going to let this dry fully, then I'm going to clean my water, my brushes, and we'll come back in and paint the water. So the next step, pretty exciting. So our sand is now dry, and we can go back into the water. I'm actually going to start here in the background, and then I'm going to work my way forwards. This back area is going to be a little bit darker, especially on the edges. We will have some light coming through the middle, but for this next section, I am going to continue using the larger 1-inch flat-headed brush. I'm going to make sure that this is nice and damp, and I've pre-tested my colors on my reference photo, and I'll show you what we're mixing here because it's quite interesting. We're going to start with quite a bit of cerulean blue. I'll take a little bit of Mars Black, make that nice and dark here. Add a little bit of titanium white to give it some gray, work down that saturation. And then I'm actually going to take a little bit of yellow, and this is going to work some green into the mixture. The blue, the yellow, they make a nice green. And we're looking for a good ocean color. And we're looking for something quite dark to begin with as our base layer, and we can add highlights on top of it. But I think this is quite nice. Now I'm going to come up to my horizon, going to start working a nice edge in here, You can actually ensure that you have a perfectly straight edge by using some painter's tape, applying it right across the edge, and then doing this, but I'm fairly confident with our abilities to make something quite straight. So I'm going to skip that step, but you are more than welcome to use it. As you can see, I'm doing this in multiple little strokes, working my way across. There might be a little bit of a bump here and there, but I can go back to that later and clean it up. And then once I have that nice defining edge, I'm going to make some vertical strokes initially, just to create kind of a safe area of pigment, like this. I'll cover the entirety of that base, dragging down from the line we created. And then I'll start working horizontally over it, so that if you see any brush strokes, they are horizontal rather than vertical. And I started with a vertical rather than the horizontal, just in case when I was going like this, I didn't accidentally go above our initial line. So it's just a little bit of a safety technique. Now I'm going to apply this all the way across. I'm going to start moving down, make sure my brush is nice and damp, grab more of that pigment, continue that blend down, working in a little bit of an X-shaped pattern to make sure I get an even consistency. And then we're going to make this just a little bit brighter. So I'll take some extra titanium white, and I'll also take just a hint of yellow as well. There we go. Start applying that. You can see that the difference is incredibly subtle, and that's really just what we want at this point. Going to work it up in that X-shaped pattern just so we get a softer gradient and it doesn't feel like it's starting kind of out of nowhere. And then I'll need to mix quite a bit more pigment. We are starting to run out. Of course, mixing on top / beside, that way I get a good comparison. Make sure we're mixing in the right direction. And I think we'll give this a try. It's quite nice. It's a little bit blue, it's a little bit gray. So I'm going to add some extra blue for the saturation, and then I'm going to add some extra yellow to make it less blue. Perfect. Blending back up into our previous application. It's still wet because we are using a damp brush. Going to make it significantly brighter now. Like that. Add a little bit more yellow, a little bit more blue, just for that saturation. Coming to this edge, working it back. And normally I say work your brush very, very softly, that way you avoid brush strokes, but they can actually look quite nice here. Now I'm also going to start blending forward. And this is going to work on top of our brown, as you can see. Because the brown isn't wet, we're getting a little bit of a chalky, toothy effect. So I'm going to make sure my brush is nice and damp, that way we can work wet onto dry. And I'm going to start skipping areas. So I'm going back and forth. I'm starting to move with a bit more of an curve. And as you can see, I'm creating these little bits of water washing up on the sand. Going over a lot of it softly, that way it looks like there is a little bit of water here still. But I'm looking for something incredibly subtle right now. So I'm back, the painting has fully dried, I have some clean water, I have some clean brushes, and before I proceed, I would just like to preface this with the fact that I am starting to deviate a little bit from the reference photo in terms of form and our subjects. I've decided to take out the rock that we had right here, just because we already have such a visually complicated sky. I didn't want two subjects to kind of conflict with one another. So we're going with a more traditional bottom here, but I'm still going to be utilizing the palette that the reference photo kind of suggests. With that said, I am going to now start going in and working on some highlights. I'm going to be using my smaller flat-headed brush. This one again is about 1/4 of an inch. And we're going to start with the light that's coming off of this. So here, I'm going to look at the pigment that we had for the highlight at the bottom, and I'm going to say, okay, we need something brighter than this, and we're going to probably have a little bit more yellow in it. So I'm going to take a little bit of blue. I'll work that down here on the palette, and I'm giving you a very wide shot here just so you can see all of the colors in conjunction. I'll take quite a bit of our yellow, and then I'll take quite a bit of our white as well. Here you can see we have almost a lemon color, and we want something significantly brighter. So, yet again, a lot more of that titanium white. This is just about what I want. You can see it just has a hint of yellow. Going to head right up here. Come right down below that. And I'm going to start working my way from the middle out to the left and to the right. I'm making very sharp little applications. Just like that. I'm going to make sure that my brush is nice and damp. That way we get a smooth application. We don't have any of that grit. All of our strokes are significantly sharper. And this is going to make it semi-transparent, so you will see that darker bluish green underneath. That is okay. All of these colors are going to be combining. And you know what? Now that you've seen kind of all of this from afar, I think I will get you a bit closer and then you can watch some of the detail work in here. So here we are, a little bit closer. I'm taking more of that pigment, but not much. It's just on the tip of my brush. I'm starting my strokes in the middle, and then again, I'm working my way out to the left and right. I'm kind of going back and forth, that way I don't make things too consistent. Here you can see that these stretched applications stretch out to different areas each time. It's not consistent. What is consistent is that the middle is the brightest and the most opaque. See that? And I'm also relieving pressure as I get towards the edges, both on the left and right hand side. Here you can see I'm almost making no impression at all. And that's just to get it a little bit sharper, but also to stop applying as much paint. So I do get that thin tapered look, but I also make it semi-transparent. At least more so than what we have here in the middle. And I'm continuously going back over areas in the middle to build that up further. Now, as we get a little bit farther away from that background, I'm starting to make broader brush strokes, and I'm also, as you can see, skipping larger areas. This is going to create the effect of a couple very small waves. That right there was a mistake. I'm just going to get a very wet brush, take all of my pigment off of it, and I'll just move that pigment out. There we go. No worries. So coming back, I'll thicken a little bit of that. I'll be a bit more playful with these strokes, just kind of continuing to add. I'll add some of these strokes over here. Not to the same extent, they won't be as large, but you can start connecting them. So here I have this one, I'll move it down very softly. It's incredibly subtle at this point. There we go. But we don't just want the light right here, it's still a fairly bright scene, so we want to move it out even more so. So I'm going to take something that's a little bit darker than this. So you know what, we'll take some more yellow, more titanium white, hint of our blue, and we'll give this a try on the edge. I think it might just be a little bit too yellow for me. I think we'll move into something a bit more gray, that way we don't fight the saturation. So I will start using some Mars Black in our mixtures here. Like that. I'll use a bit more blue, a bit more titanium white. There we go. That's really pretty. See that? Go over that yellow that I just applied, see if I like it. Stretch it out from that middle area. Very much like the reference photo. Good. Here you can see I'm moving horizontally until I get a little bit closer to us, and then I'm moving more loose, and there is a bit of a dip in some of these applications. I'm also not leaving any true openings back here. We're getting a consistent coverage, but you can still see the strokes. Accidentally just grabbed a bit of extra yellow there. We don't want to saturate it too much. So I'll remix like so. Remember, you want it to be mostly gray with a hint of color. And I'm just going to do a couple of layers here. And we'll just continue this until we get to this middle point in the water, making the lips of the water, the area that's a little bit wider, more opaque than the rest. So I'm just going to go ahead, kind of perfect some of these edges, soften things up, and then I'll see you for our next step. So here yet again is another wide shot. As you can see, while we did make a lot of this quite gray, it still looks green because we just have all of these different colors and it stands out next to all of the almost reds that we have. Red and green are complementary colors, and while we don't have direct red and direct green, we do have a lot of colors that are similar and they're kind of helping make each other pop, which is quite nice, I think. Something we might go and do a little bit later is add some extra purple and pink into the edges, but for now I'm really happy with that area, and I think we should continue moving forward into the midground where again the waves are starting to change. So this is where we are actually going to start seeing waves, because in the foreground everything's very clear, it's sharp, you can see detail, but as you move farther away everything kind of compresses visually because of perspective. So with that in mind, there are waves back here, they're just too far to see, that's why you have those little lines, all of those little horizontal strokes, and they get a lot more character as we move forward. So that's really what we're going to start focusing on next, and we're also going to start making the water a little bit more blue as we move forward, because we're moving away from all of that yellow light, which is working into the blue, which is making that green. So again, just something else to consider. But with that, let's jump back into it. So what we need to do is create a transition from this area into this area. We're going to continue making more of these. And right now, I still have a bit of that wet gray. And I'll take areas that I don't feel like are the lips, I'll bring them down and I'll create a new subject, like that. Take a bit more. I'll say, okay, you know what, this looks like it's dipping down, so this is up, this is down, this is up, and then from here we can move forward again. And my brush is quite damp, so I'm really able to move around this pigment. It's giving me a lot of opportunity to change things that I might not necessarily love. And here you can see I have very transparent applications, which are just allowing me to kind of figure out what exactly I want before really committing to it. See that? I liked it. I said, okay, we'll add more pigment, and we did. So here I'm moving down, I'm creating larger gaps than we had before. I might work it back a little bit to create another little wave that's starting here and moving forward. And then we have this one that's in front of it. Once I have the main idea established, I'll come back in with some more thick pigment and work that forward. There we go. So far, so good. Now let's take what we have right here and make it a little bit more blue. So I'll take that cerulean blue, I'll take less of our cadmium yellow deep hue, like that. We'll take quite a bit of titanium white because we know it needs to be very bright. And then we'll take some Mars black because we know we need to make it significantly more gray. So here yet again, mixing on top of / beside my old mixture. As you can tell, it's a little bit brighter, but it's also more blue. So this is great. I'll start working this along some of the protruding lips. I'll work it into some of the background ones very slightly. See that? And this right here, it didn't really have a good stop on the edge, so I'm just going to continue moving that for a second. Now I'll create more of them. You can see I'm being a little bit loose. I'll move forward, I'll move back. My brush just kind of left the canvas there. I said, okay, you know what? That seems natural, I'll let it happen. Now I'm cleaning my brush, taking off that excess water, or excess paint. And now, you see I actually grabbed a little bit of yellow from my water because I didn't clean it before I moved to the blue. Which is okay, we will still have yellow in this, but before this dries, I'm going to start moving it around. I'm going to make it a little bit more horizontal. See that? And I'm just going to start reshaping. Remember that the openings in between each wave is now going to be a bit wider. And you'll really start to see the form soon. Right now we're just placing the idea of these subjects. This right here will be an actual wave. There we go. Didn't move this one out yet, so I'll have to do that. Combine it to this one. So far, so good. Now that we have some waves starting to be established, we get into the sand, where things really start to roll in, and you don't have anything that's really picking up a lot of size. So, this is where I say, okay, you know what? I can see a separation between water and land right here. Maybe I'll create a little bit of a dividing line. Like that. And you can see it's a little bit wobbly. That'll give it some character, make it interesting. I'll say, okay, here's another dividing line. So I'm going to the edge of the blue, bluish green, and I'm incorporating this brighter pigment, like that. It's starting to look like water and waves. Also, if the values keep seemingly changing, that's just because it's one of those days where it's semi-cloudy, semi-sunny, and it's changing how bright the room is, but also the values a little bit, because the sun gives off warm light, then when the clouds come in, you get less light, but it also gets less warm. So if you're noting a little bit of a change in these longer shots, that's just kind of what's occurring. And I noted this in the last lesson, I used to try to paint around this only on perfectly sunny days, but it's actually good to paint on days like this because it allows you to see your painting in different lighting scenarios. Here I'm going back and I'm accentuating some of our more prominent pieces. But I think we have a lot of the base in this. So we're going to take a step back, look at it as a whole, say, okay, where do we need another wave? Where do we need to incorporate more detail? Where do we need to take out detail? Things of that nature. And then once you've established that, we can come back in, add a lot of detail, reflection, highlight. So here we have our wide shot, and again, we're looking for little changes we might want to make. When we paint really close, when we're very close to the painting, it can be difficult to kind of differentiate areas and how they work together, what's cohesive, what isn't, because we're so focused on technique, on application, on detail of a certain area, and it's so common to work really hard on a single specific area, step back and say, hey, that doesn't fit with the rest of the painting. So right now we're just making sure things are cohesive, and what I'm noticing fairly early on here is that I almost do have a block of darker water that is more green, and then I have a block of lighter water that is more blue. So I need to continue the transition here between light and dark. I need to interject a bit more of that yellowish green into this area, and I also feel like I need a bit more detail right here, maybe a little bit right there, and I'm going to do this from a distance, just so you can see how it kind of starts coming together. So for this, I do want a bit more of the gray that we had initially. So I'll take quite a bit of yellow, a little bit of blue, a lot of titanium white, good amount of Mars black. Mix that up. Need to make it darker. It's close. I think it could use a little bit more saturation. And I'm just comparing it to what I have here on the edge. So a little bit more yellow, a little bit more blue. And now I have a lot of pigment over the entirety of my brush to the point where I won't be able to deliver detailed strokes. So I'm just wiping that excess off. I'm making sure that brush is nice and damp. Then I'll take just a little bit of that pigment and I'll work in some extra detail here where I just didn't feel like we had enough. I'll add a little bit more over here to balance it. So far so good. I'll add a bit more highlight right there, a bit more right there. Soften the edges via finger painting. Never forget just how useful finger painting can be. And then as I move down here, I do want that to be a bit darker. So that's my highlight pigment. I'll mix a bit of a darker pigment for it. Blue, black, a little bit of yellow, quite a bit of titanium white. We want it to be very gray. And I think we're quite close. Okay, let's give this a shot. So I see these dark pigments here, I'll test it here. Works quite well, good. I'm going to come right at this point, and this is about 2/3 between this highlighted wave and this highlighted wave. So this will make this the base of the wave. And I'll just have a little bit of darker pigment there, because the light will work its way up the wave because it gets more thin as it moves up, and then we get more light right down here at the bottom because then you see the top of the next wave curving. So this is just a little bit of a darker area. I think I want it to be a hint more blue. It's quite green, and I might make it a hint darker. That worked really well. So now again, 2/3 down between this and this highlight. Starting in the middle, I'm doing a soft blend up. I'm doing a little bit of a blend down, but not far. And this is just going to create some extra dimension. See that? Really enjoying our seascapes lately. I feel like I'm actually learning a lot. Playing with some really interesting palettes, and they're kind of just forcing me to learn, which is not a bad thing at all. Never want to feel like you know everything, because then you stop learning. So that's working really well. I think I'm actually going to divide this area with that nice dark pigment that we have. Just work it up here a little bit, that way it's nice and cohesive. It's throughout the entirety of the painting. There we go. And now I think we can get a little bit closer again and start working on some highlights. Now, before we do start on those highlights, I did just want to show you up close where all of these darker areas were interjected. Again, this was the highlight, this was the highlight, this was 2/3 down. I blended up quite a bit, I blended down just a little bit. The same goes for that and all of the others. And I do just want to do one right up close here with you. Here I'm blending that top up. Grab a bit more of that pigment. I don't have too much left, but here, highlight, highlight. And here I'm just going back with an almost water brush and softening some of those edges. There we go. Really, really nice. But now let's start working some of this highlight and this green back down. So start with the smallest hint of our yellow, quite a bit of titanium white. There we go. I think we can actually make that a bit more white. It's quite nice. Now I'll test it up here. Build it into those highlights. Say, okay, you know what, that works really, really well. Good. So I'm spending more time here than I intended to, just because it did fit so well. I'm just building up that light a little bit. I'm going to make sure my brush is nice and damp. That way I can extend it now. There we go. I started with a little bit of light, and I'm slowly adding to it and building it out. Similar to everything else in painting, generally better to start with a little bit, and then if you like it, start adding more, because it's a lot easier to add more than it is to take away. So we're just brightening this. Now we'll take some more, and we'll start working down. And I'll say, okay, this is the top of a wave, so I'll give that a hint of highlight. Say this is the top of a wave, hint of highlight, a little bit over here too. So this is quite subtle. So really the only technique that's happening is a horizontal stroke, right? See that? things are going to get a little bit more complicated in just a second. When we take a bit more, we move down. This one could also probably be a horizontal line. As could this, as could this, as could this. Yeah. Lots of trial and error. Okay, good. Now, I'm going to skip this one just to show you how I'm doing the next one. So we're not getting too repetitive, but I will go back and do that in a second. Here I'm lining the top of the wave with this highlight, as you can see. Grab a little bit more, build it up, have it dissipate as it moves towards the edges, same as we did back here. But then things get a little bit more interesting because, as you can see here, there's a little bit of a lip. It falls, the water, and I'll show you with a mixture of the blue that we mixed and the yellow. So there we have our blue, there we have our yellow, we have our white. We need to remember that it needs to be bright, but not too bright, so Mars Black. That's a good mix. So now the water, it comes up and then it starts falling towards us. So I'm making the edge of the water here, and all of this dark area in between those two highlights is water that is falling. And then you can bring that highlight forward from the back and have it soften as it moves this way. And the same thing with the water that's at the peak of the fall. You can start blending that back up. So right in between this highlight and this highlight, you have a little bit of a dark area and highlights on both the top and the bottom. But I'm also going to be taking a little bit of that highlight, the corner of my brush, and I'm going to do a little bit of a pitter patter for the water that's kind of falling off, creating a little bit of a mist and that effect. And this is just happening at the bottom of the wave. And it's connecting and blending to that previous application. And again, this is where it's interesting. So the top is more yellow, the bottom area is a mix of the yellow and the blue, both of which are quite opaque, the middle being transparent and darker, and then the very bottom of the wave in the fall, you get this little sprinkled tap effect. And I'm just working my way around the wave. Here we have another wave that's falling this way. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. I feel like a lot of artists on YouTube and instructors of that sort, they kind of all have these catchphrases, different things that are said repeatedly. I used to say, with that being said, unintentionally, quite frequently, and then people brought it to my attention, and then I said it very frequently, intentionally, just because I thought it was humorous. But I'm afraid that people might start to notice that I say tap, tap, tap a lot. It's a big part of the process, and I don't know. By bringing it up, one of two things is going to occur. People are either going to really start saying it, or we're all just going to move on, move past it, act like it never really happened. But we'll see. It'll be interesting. Anyways, back to the procedure here. I'm mixing up a bit more of that highlight because it started to dry. I might make it a little bit brighter as we move into the foreground, which seems a little counterintuitive because, you think the reflection's back here and that should be the brightest point. But the eye does recognize a lot more detail and a lot more kind of individual colors in the foreground and values. So here I am going back with something that is a little bit brighter, and I'm adding more texture to my wave, extra little taps and all of that. And we will have more waves, so here's one. Just doing that same tap with the corner of the brush. Right now my brush actually has quite a bit of pigment on it, so it's a little difficult to work with subtlety. So if you do have too much pigment, do remember to take that off and then work with less. I'd also like to know that the biggest wave is going to be right here, and then they get a little bit smaller as you move closer in towards the shore. Kind of start to taper down. Lots of additional taps. Right there. And it's okay to make them incredibly subtle. Some of them you want to be very notable, but some you don't. I'm going to make them significantly more soft, not necessarily with my finger like that, but just with a softer touch over on the edges, just because I don't want too much attention being drawn to the edges, because I want the viewer's eye in the middle of the painting. And remember, the peak of the wave, the area that might start dipping down, that gets the brightest applications, and the edges get more transparent. We can have just a little bit down here as well. But we do have an entirely different idea, technique for the bottom here, and we'll talk about that in just a second. I think I'll actually go ahead and just finish off these medium-sized waves here. Grab a little bit more of that nice light yellow for the tops of some of these. But I'll see you in just a second, and then we'll progress with a new part of the painting. So here, yet again, we have another wider shot just to show you how all of those applications work in context with the rest of the painting. And I have to say, at this point, we can really start to see it coming together, and I am just so pleased with how this is turning out. It's really making me fall in love with these ocean scenes, and honestly, I'm not even done, but I'm inspired to go and start another. So you have to love when you get those feelings when you're working on a piece. But I would like to take this moment to kind of pause and reflect and ask you to do the same as well. For you to look at your painting and ask yourself a couple key questions just to make sure that things are flowing in the direction that they should. So with that, what I want you to look for is this area right here. Make sure that this is essentially the brightest pigment that you have in the water, with maybe the exception of some highlights in your 2 to 3 larger waves right here. Make sure that it starts to taper in this way, and that as your waves move forward, they get larger and larger, that you have this gap between them, and that your waves are also different distances apart. You want a bit of diversity there so that it's consistently engaging and interesting. You don't want the viewer to look at just a couple waves and say, okay, I understand it, I can move on. You want it to continuously be engaging. What you also want to make sure is that the middle area right here has the most yellow, that it descends as it moves to the left and to the right. Also that this is the most opaque applications. Again, to the left and to the right should get significantly darker, they should get softer, they should essentially just fade off into these edge pigments. Also, we're building up our waves to get larger and larger until we get to this point. We have 2 or 3 big ones, then they get very small very quickly. That's also quite important. And if you kind of put all of these things together, you should end up with a really nice landscape. It's not too late to go back and change any of these things, or to just kind of play with them and work on them. I am done with this area for the most part. I might go back into these waves and add a little bit more detail, but before I do that, I want to see how much detail is in the foreground. Just in case I add too much here, I don't want this to be more detailed than the foreground. I don't want it to be this kind of awkward balancing thing. So I'm going to wait there for a little bit. We are going to move into the foreground, but before we do, this is incredibly, wildly important. I've been thinking about the tap thing, and I think it could actually be quite fun. At this point, we're quite far into the video. Everybody watching at this point is obviously really invested. They care about this, and that's a wonderful thing. So as kind of a point of pride and honor, at this point, go and leave a comment in the comment section, and then at the very end of it, just put tap, tap, tap. That way I know you got this far, you are one of the few, and I think that could be special. Let's turn this into a fun thing. And you know what? We'll keep tap, tap, tapping along. With that said though, let's jump back into this, right down into here, start adding some real detail, and then we can move back up into the painting yet again. So let's clean our water, clean our brushes, and get right to it. Now we're going to start on our details down here with that same smaller flat-headed brush. I'm going to take a little bit of our red for the first time in a while. I'm going to take about an equal, maybe a little bit less amount of our cadmium yellow deep hue. Mix those together. Grab quite a bit of Mars black and a little bit of titanium white. And what we're trying to do right here is mix a similar color to that of our sand, but I want it to be slightly darker than what we achieved before. I can still see a little bit of it here on my palette, so I'm just kind of comparing those. And then once I have something nice and dark, I'm going to go right under a couple of our waves, the area that's the brightest, that's really standing out. And this will just look like there's a slight shadow underneath that the wave is actually causing. I do feel like what I just created is a little bit too saturated, so I'm going to get some extra Mars black, some extra titanium white, mix those two together. I think when you're working with a painting with a lot of colors, generally subtlety is ideal initially at least, and then you can build up saturations or what have you later on. But I like to start by making things a bit softer, that way I have some more room to play. And if you have just so many different colors happening at the same time, it can be a little bit distracting. So by making things subtle, you get to choose over time what you really want to stand out. And that's essentially what we're doing here. But as you can see, I'm still just finding little spots that could be slightly darker. Because the waves are most dominant in the middle, I'm letting the edges kind of get more transparent, taper out, in the same way that we did the actual highlights. And if you do accidentally go over a little portion of the highlight, don't you worry about it. We are going to go back over those anyway with our highlights. But we don't need too much of this. This is just a little added piece, and if you want, you can start blending that shadow forward just a little bit. So I'm just working my way, picking up whatever little paint I can, and just doing a slight blend. This right now looks quite stark, but it won't in just a minute. Now, I do recommend waiting for this to dry fully before you continue, but I think mine is just about dry. So I am going to continue. I'm going to take some of our blue. This is fully dry, by the way. A little bit of our yellow, a lot of our titanium white. Make a nice highlight. Hint of Mars black, just to nullify hint of that saturation. And now I'm going to come back here. Working my way along that edge, this time with significantly more highlight. I'm using a little bit of a tap here, that way it's not absolutely perfect. I want slight changes, I want some areas to be more opaque, some to be softer. Now that's a good start, but we still have quite a ways to go. So I'm going to continue taking more of that, and I'm actually going to extend a couple of these out farther than the center area that we have right now, just because I want it to feel a bit more natural. And initially, we put it all in the center to draw the eye there, but I think it needs to be a bit more balanced. So, I think I'll mix a bit more of our pigment. I might make it slightly more blue this time, but I will still have a hint of that yellow. There we go. Head to the edge, and just do a little bit of that. And I'm going to start moving this back into the shadowy areas of previous applications and have them kind of connect into one another. So this right here, this can continue, and it'll go back into this one. This can come out, and then it can come back again. Just trying to create a lot more detail and create some surprises. Now I'm going to wet my brush, and while all of this is still wet, I'll do a little bit of a blend. Every time you do this, you'll lighten the value slightly, creating a greater contrast between the shadow part and the rest of it, but it'll also give it a slight glassy wet effect. There we go, already looking so much better. Add an extra highlight over here, another one here. Again, being more mindful of my edges than I was before. And I'll go back and blend that back. Use a little bit more blue on the edges and a little bit more greenish yellow in the middle. Now, we'll make that same mixture a little bit more Mars Black this time though. We want our next application to be a highlight, but a bit more of a subtle one. And from this front piece, we'll just kind of create these little wispy movements of water that move back primarily diagonally, but also they're meant to be sporadic, and you just want them moving background to foreground. They can connect to other ones. See that? It's a really subtle, very simple detail, but it can do so much for the painting. Again, we weren't sure how much detail we wanted in the foreground, and this is where we really find out. Remember, if you add too much, it's okay, we can always go back. Just paint over it. But you can see I'm kind of moving in these Z-like patterns back up towards the top. And we're going to stop this before we get to the true waves. But for now, in the foreground, it looks great. I have quite a bit of water on my brush so that this is all semi-transparent. And so that it doesn't overtake the main highlights. Don't neglect the edges. Remember, we are working harder on those now. There we go. Starting to come along. And this is also another application that's going to look really fantastic from farther away. I tell this story a lot, but when I was in high school, when I took my first painting class, I believe I was probably 14, maybe 15, and one of the peer tutors looked at my painting and they took a couple of steps back and then they looked at my painting again and they said, "You know what? You're really good at painting things that look great from far away." And I was so insulted because I thought, what do you mean? It doesn't look good up close and doing all of these details. And then they went to explain that no, when you get up close, you see all these beautiful colors and these strokes and these applications, and then you move farther away and you see a whole painting, and it's great because you get two very different things out of it. And it's great that you also get to see the process work. And once it was explained, I was like, oh, that makes sense. Thank you. Prior to that, though, again, I was a little taken back. And now it's something I really work towards. I love seeing the brushstrokes in paintings, and this is definitely one of those things that looks so nice. From far away, it looks so realistic, but up close, you can see all of the hard work, all of the brushstrokes, and that's a pretty amazing thing. So, with that said, I am now making a brighter, slightly bluish green highlight. There we go. And I'm going to build up the middle areas again. As we add more layers, we're going to be increasing the value because, of course, we're working on a darker background. And when you apply fairly thin pigment over a dark background, you don't necessarily get the light pigment that's on your palette. You get the transparent layer that's light, but you see the darker pigments underneath. The more light pigments we layer on top of light pigments, the more light it actually looks. So here, just by going back, we start to fix it. Also, I think I'm losing my voice. Lots of talking, lots of teaching the last couple of days. Luckily, we're not too far from the finish line. There we go. Really nice. I'm going to continue moving this forward, and you know what, we might actually cover up the entirety of our sand with this one. I initially intended to keep a bit of it, but the more we extend the water, the more I like it. The more natural I think it looks, and we can still keep that nice color showing through portions of it. This is very watery. You'll notice just how transparent this is. That's a key feature as you start to move over the sand. Make sure you're using much more water on your brush than you are actual pigment. Something else I'm still making sure I'm doing is I'm creating my stroke and then I'm blending the top half of it upwards while I'm keeping the bottom half of it nice and sharp. Now I did intend to move back up into the waves, but before we do, I had another idea that I think is going to turn out really well. And I did a quick test of it on this wave, but we're essentially adding a pitter-patter, a little tap, tap, tap of this almost white pigment, essentially what we're using for the edge. We move it up, we allow it to dissipate, we leave little openings, and of course I'll show you how we do that. So here, again, just more of the highlight we've been using. I pick one of the main dominant waves. So this one right here, I'm doing this tapping like that. You can see it gets brighter, but then I start to move up. And it's occasionally connecting with the previous application, but it's not always. I think I may have a call. Only rang once. Or buzzed once. But anyways. There we go. If you find that in this process, your line starts to get lost, just go back, add more thick pigment, and then start again. This is just one more detail you can add. I think we'll need a bit more paint. So white, hint of blue, hint of Mars black, hint of yellow. find the edge, make those little pitter patters, start moving back. And then we'll see what this looks like from afar. Also though, don't forget to do an edge or two. So here's a little bit of a wider shot to again show you how that all works with the rest of the painting, and I have to say I really like that detail. We didn't get all that much opportunity to incorporate it or play with it in this painting just because we're working with a rather small area on a rather small canvas. But if you are working on a significantly larger canvas, I think this technique can really add a lot to the foreground. And I actually feel like it did. It made our foreground pop more so than the middle of the water here or even the background. And because of that, now we can go back in and add all of that extra detail to the waves that I did really want to do earlier. So that's exciting. We will use a different brush for that, a different technique. And I'm also going to add a lot more highlight back into the middle of this area. With that said though, I'm going to pause for just a second, and I want to say a big thank you to everyone who is supporting the channel over on Patreon. All of the patrons, you make this happen. You make sure that I can spend this much time, multiple days each week, working on these lessons and just give them my all and make sure that we make something that we can all really honestly be proud of. I've been trying a lot of different things lately. I've really been kind of exploring painting medium colors, and I'm doing that because you provide the opportunity for me to do so. This channel is primarily fan funded, and you know, I wouldn't have the time, I wouldn't have the opportunity or the ability to do this without you and your support, and I just want to say a really big thank you. And everybody else who's watching this, you know, say a big thank you to the patrons, because they really make this happen. So big thank you to all of you. As per usual, if you would also like to help support the channel, you can do so up over on Patreon. Up there we have the traceable and the reference photo for this one. There are also things like individual art critiques. I have an exclusive Facebook group where we all kind of share artwork and help each other out. There are a bunch of bonus lessons that can't be seen anywhere else, and I also have all 5 of my ebooks up there as well. So, you know, go check that out if you're interested. It really does mean a lot. It is the reason we are able to do these lessons, and it's also just a great way of saying thank you for the lessons if you want to do that as well. So with that, we are going to jump back into the lessons. I feel like I have to say thank you at least once in all of these videos, and yeah. So with that, we are going to continue with the lesson. I'll grab my new brush, I'll show you what we're going to do, and let's make this even better. Next, we're going to take a smaller flat-headed brush. This one is about 1/2 inch, but you can take something that's a bit smaller. And I'm going to actually peel back the bristles on this to the point where we get something that's quite disheveled. And we're doing this so that we have all of these very randomized bristles that kind of stick out. Now, when I take this and I apply some paint to it, each of these will have a very minuscule amount of paint. And when I tap it on the canvas, I'll get hundreds of very small impressions that really, they're so small you couldn't render them in any other way. So it's a very quick and easy way to create just so many little applications. It's great for splashing water and just creating all of that detail in our waves. With that said though, I would like to note that with this, you want it to be completely dry. If it's wet, it'll condense the bristles. You won't get as many markings, and you don't want to apply much paint to it. You want a very, very minimal amount to the point where it's just on the tips of the brushes. If you apply a lot, again, it'll condense the bristles, and that just is not what we want. So use a very minimal amount of paint. Don't wet your brush first. And if you have to go and clean it, because we will have to go and clean it, just make sure that it is fully dry and re-peeled before the next part of the process. And again, this is just a regular flat-headed brush that I've peeled back on. So with that, let's get into it. So here I'm going to take a little bit of our titanium white, move that out onto the palette. I'll grab a hint of our yellow, create a nice gold, and as you can see, there's barely any pigment on the brush. And that's exactly what we want. Then I'm going to come down to the bottom of one of these waves, and I'm just going to do a little bit of a tap. I'm rotating my brush, and as you can see, we're starting to get these little markings. They're incredibly small. I'm rotating my brush in the air so that I get a different application each time, but I'm not rotating my brush once it's touched the canvas, because if I do that, it'll start moving that paint around and we will quickly end up with a much larger stroke. So here we have a little bit of added detail, but we're only getting so much because I only mixed so much paint here on the palette. So what I'd recommend to do this in a more effective way is use another brush. Here I have a smaller flat-headed brush. I'm going to mix quite a bit of that paint here on the palette with this one because I don't have to worry about that paint running up it or it getting condensed. And then once I have this, I'm just going to clean off that other brush really quickly, set it aside, head back to this one, grab some of that paint. Now I have significantly more. And just like that, look at all of those extra applications. So much more quick, so much more simple. And now we can kind of jump around, grab a bit more, just like that. And I'm trying to get it, again, around the bottom, the area that is falling. This wave's closer to us, so hypothetically it should have more. And again, I'm being very cautious right now. You could add a lot more paint to the brush, you could get a lot more impressions, but I really do want to take my time here. Make sure that it's just right and I'm not applying too big of strokes, because we're really getting close to the finish line here of the painting, and I just don't want to overdo anything quickly at this point. So, we'll grab some more. A little bit of golden water just dancing around. And yet again, we are just doing a little tap, tap, tap technique with our brush. You can also throw a little bit of it down here. You will still have slight amounts jumping around, and it's really nice. I'm going to try to make sure that I have some of this over on the left and right hand side as well. That way it isn't too centralized, and again, it seems a bit more natural. There we go. It's a lot of detail, very quick and easy. Now I'm just kind of jumping around, adding a little bit here and there, still being thoughtful about it, but quite loose as well. Now from there, I'm going to clean that brush. I've done about all that I want to with it. You can add significantly more should you want to, but again, I want mine to be a little bit more subtle in this piece. From there, we're going to take our smaller flat-headed brush, the same one we used to mix this initially. I'll mix a nice highlight with yellow, hint of blue, make that slight golden green, and a lot of titanium white. Because now we're going back and we're working on more highlights. Remember, the more times you do this, the more it'll really start to pop. And I'm going to do a little bit of a pitter-patter to bring that highlight down more so into the falling area of this wave, making the edges a little bit brighter as we've done a number of times, even creating a new wave here and there. But what I essentially want to do now is create something a little bit darker, bit more gray. And I'm going to find that highlight and I'm going to move a bit more of it in the center of the painting, but closer to us. So I'm kind of working back and forth. There was a little bit of a zigzag there, as you saw. There we go. And I just want to heighten that highlight that we have in the foreground, because it's so prominent in the background. And while it'll get lesser as it gets closer to us, because we're getting farther away from the light, we still want it to feel cohesive. So I'm going back over this again. This is probably the third or fourth time in the full painting, just because it's such a prominent piece. As is that, as is this. And then I'm building this one back up again, making that middle area just a little bit brighter. We can do the same down here. Now, as you can see, this middle area definitely looks significantly more detailed, and I feel is much more balanced with this bottom piece. So the next step is to yet again take some steps back and see how this looks in contrast with the sky, both with color but also with the amount of detail. I do have a suspicion we'll need to merge the colors a little bit more, but we are getting really close. So here we have an extremely wide shot, and now we can start looking at the sky in conjunction with, hypothetically, maybe our finished water. So this is a really exciting point in the painting. This is where we start to kind of move into touch-ups, and this is apparently where the sun goes down and makes the room extremely dark. But look at what it did to the painting. That's really nice. Again, it can be great to paint on days that are semi-cloudy, just because you do get to see your painting in different lighting scenarios. And you know, when you put your painting up in the house or in your apartment, it's not always going to have the same consistent light. So it's always interesting to see. But with that, I think from even this darker shot, I can articulate that I really love the amount of detail that we've incorporated down here. It feels very real. And now when you look at the painting, the eye goes to the brightest spot, that's the sky. And then when it's done there, it's kind of led down, and you feel like you're there, because there's just so much detail and so much to kind of connect you with the painting. So I'm really, really happy with that. What I do think we can work on a little bit is color, because something that I really love is the transition from this very soft blue that we have here to this very soft green. They're essentially the same value. It creates a nice movement from one to the other, and I just think we could have a little bit more of a transition in here. So I'm going to add a bit more blue up into this cloud, and I might add a little bit of purple down into the water. So those, I believe, are our next steps. With that, let's jump into it. So now that we're back up here, let's take a little bit of our cerulean blue, find a relatively clean spot on our palette, get a little bit of Mars black, probably about double that, titanium white, and we'll mix up a nice bluish gray. Then we'll need to throw a hint of red into it, because we are working on top of a purple, and we don't want it to be too different initially. I'll try this right down here. I do like this area a lot, but you know, we can always add, always improve. And I'll just work this along that bottom, start to blend it up. And I'm starting to run out of paint, so I'm going to take that paint off. Going to make sure my brush is nice and damp, and then I'll just do a slight blend up with the color that we have here. And this is really just going to create a bit of a wash. And a wash is like a glaze. It's when you take a very thin pigment, you apply it over a pre-existing pigment. It doesn't change any of the harsh values. It just kind of augments the hue a little bit. So that's what we're doing here. Just adding a little bit of blue up into our painting. I think I'll thin this out a little bit more. Another great thing about it is if you feel you add too much of a pigment, you can just add a lot of water and move it about until it's not thick on a certain area, and so it isn't as noticeable. Now that right there is quite noticeable. So I'm going to take a clean finger and I'm just going to start wiping a little bit of this off. And as you can see, just like that, we have a significantly more blue cloud. It's a little bit less dramatic. We can continue working with it. There we go. You can see I'm just slowly stripping off a little bit of that paint. Grab a bit more, work it over into this cloud over here to the right. Work it in between the sun rays. If we apply it on top, it will make more of a green, so we don't want that. But I think that right there is a good start. Let's take a little bit of yellow now. Turn it slightly into a green, and we'll work that in here. By the way, I am doing a lot of experimenting right now, so I do recommend just watching this next part first before you actually try it, because I may not keep it. It's a very cohesive color with the water. Let's see if we like it though. Oh, I think that's really, really interesting. Wow. That's neat. Okay, I'm going to do some of that over here. It's important sometimes to pause, give your painting a good honest look, rather than just continuing whether you like it or not. There we go. It's significantly more subtle, which is really quite interesting. I feel like we now definitely have a transition upwards, but I do feel like the cloud doesn't pop as much anymore. So what we're going to do, we're going to take some of our blue, our red, our Mars black, our titanium white, more blue, more titanium white, more Mars black. We're going to mix up a nice dark purple, something similar to what we initially had in our cloud. And I'll try applying this back up to the top. Significantly darker. I think it could be a little bit more blue as well. So add blue, we'll add more white. There we go. Give this a try. That's really quite nice. Maybe add a hint more red, a hint more Mars black. There we are. Start working this up to the top again. And all of this is actually going to go on incredibly smoothly because we just added that wash, which made a lot of this wet. And now we're blending into a very thin layer of paint. So it's a really easy application process at this point. And we can even do a glaze with this right back down. Now doing multiple glazes can be really interesting because now we have a gradient from this purple down to this blue. Now glazing is a bit more of an advanced technique, so you don't have to do it. You could always just repaint the area, but if you do want to give it a try, you are more than welcome to. That said, I do recommend trying the technique itself on a painting that you don't particularly love, just in case it takes a little while to learn. Because, you know, new techniques, they generally do. And that's okay. I know the first couple of times I tried glazing, I found old canvases that I had laying around and I said, you know what, let's try some different things. Different amounts of water, different amounts of pigment. And, you know, once we have what we want, I'll apply it to the actual canvas I want to. And that worked out quite well. So now that we've adjusted the sky, I am going to take a little bit more of that very watery bluish purple that we have, and I'll just work it into a couple of the edges in the shadows of our water. Make it very transparent very soft. I want this to be almost unnoticeable. But subconsciously, it'll help tie the piece together. So this is now the part of the painting where we take a step back, we look at our canvas, and we ask ourselves some very important, honest questions. That being, is this the painting that we want it to be? Are our values and our hues correct? Do we have our details where we want them to be? Is our painting balanced as a whole? And if, like me, your answer to all of that is yes, this is exactly what I want it to be, then this is simply a time to celebrate and to go find a new home for your painting on your wall. I am incredibly pleased with how this turned out. I feel like I actually learned a lot through this lesson, and it's always such a wonderful feeling, and I'm so grateful to all of the patrons who voted for this lesson in the latest poll. It didn't win the last poll, it came in second, but we did the first place winner last week, and this one, it actually only lost by a single vote, so I said, okay, you know what? We definitely need to do this one as well, and I'm so glad we did. I'm actually really excited to go and start another seascape. But with that said, thank you to everyone who did get this far. Thank you to all of the patrons who do support the channel. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can do so. There is a link in the video description where, again, you can get all 5 of my ebooks. You can get access to our exclusive Facebook group, individual art critiques, traceables, reference photos, all of that fun stuff. And again, it's just a great way to say thank you and support the channel. But with that, I will see you next week with a brand new painting lesson next Saturday, provided you press the subscribe button, but more importantly, the bell button, because that will actually notify you when the new lesson goes live. But also, remember, if you made it this far in the lesson, make sure you leave a comment and you end it with tap, tap, tap. That way I know you did get this far. Could be a fun way of kind of keeping track who's getting through these. And yeah, so thank you for spending this time here with me today. I am in a fantastic mood. I'm really excited. I'm really happy. I can't wait to share this with you, to edit it and put it up. So, I think that's the next thing I will be doing. So, yet again, just thank you for hanging out. Thank you for spending this time. This was a pleasure. I will see you very soon with a brand new painting lesson. And above all, as always, stay creative.